The high desert sun beat down on Fort Bragg's advanced sniper training facility as Corporal Kira Thornwald stepped off the transport truck, her weather pack slung over one shoulder. The heat shimmered off the tarmac in waves that distorted the distant mountain range, but she barely noticed. Her pale gray eyes swept across the compound with the same measured assessment she applied to everything, taking in the rifle range, the observation tower, and the cluster of male soldiers gathered near the armory entrance. She had arrived early, as always. Punctuality was a habit drilled into her long before the Marine Corps had ever touched her life, back when her father would time her morning runs with the same stopwatch he used for his own SEAL team training. But that was a detail she kept locked away, filed under information that served no purpose in conversation. One of the soldiers near the armory noticed her approach. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the easy confidence of someone who had never seriously questioned his place in any room. Staff Sergeant Ryan Coulter, according to the name tape on his chest. He nudged the man beside him and said something that made the group chuckle. Kira kept walking, her boots crunching on gravel. Coulter stepped forward, blocking her path with a grin that did not quite reach his eyes. "So they finally sent us some support staff," he said. His tone was friendly enough on the surface, but there was an edge underneath. "Administrative building is that way, sweetheart. We handle the shooting side of things." She met his gaze without expression. "Corporal Thornwald," she said quietly, "reporting for advanced sniper qualification." She held out her transfer orders. The grin faltered for half a second before returning, wider now. He took the papers, scanned them, then handed them back. "Well," he said, drawing out the word, "this should be interesting." He glanced back at his friends. "Guys, looks like we got ourselves some diversity training." More laughter rippled through the group. Kira said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence often communicated more than any clever retort ever could. Before we continue with what happened next, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you have seen women break barriers in male-dominated fields where you are from, or perhaps you know someone who proved everyone wrong through quiet determination. The training facility coordinator, a grizzled master sergeant named Voss, emerged from the admin building and waved her over. He at least had the decency to treat her transfer orders with professional courtesy, processing her paperwork and assigning her a bunk in the visiting personnel quarters without commentary. When he handed her the training schedule, he paused. "You know what you are getting into here, Corporal?" he asked. His voice was neutral, but his eyes held something that might have been concern. "This is not basic marksmanship. This is the top tier. We got some of the best shooters in the military here." "I understand, Sergeant," she replied. He studied her for a moment longer, then nodded. "Weapon checkout is at 0600. Do not be late." She was not late. She was never late. When she arrived at the armory the next morning, Coulter and his crew were already there, and they made a point of watching as she signed out her rifle. It was an M24 SWS, worn but well-maintained, and she checked it over with the methodical care of someone who understood that a weapon was only as reliable as the person who serviced it. "You know how to use that thing?" one of Coulter's friends asked. His name tape read Morrison. He was shorter than Coulter, but carried himself with the same casual arrogance. "Because if you need help, we could show you the basics. You know which end the bullet comes out of." The group laughed again. Kira finished her inspection, slung the rifle, and walked past them toward the range without responding. The first day of training was diagnostic. Each shooter would engage targets at various distances to establish baseline capability. Kira waited her turn, watching the others perform. They were good. Coulter especially. He hit center mass on every target out to 800 meters, and he made sure everyone knew it, pumping his fist after each successful shot. When her name was called, she walked to the firing line and settled into position. The wind was steady from the west, maybe 8 miles per hour. Temperature, 84 degrees. Barometric pressure high. She made her calculations automatically, the numbers flowing through her mind like water. The targets appeared at 200 meters. She fired. Hit. 400 meters. Hit. 600 meters. Hit. 800 meters. Hit. Each shot was clean, centered, unremarkable in its precision. She stood, cleared her weapon, and walked back to the waiting area without celebration or comment. Coulter was watching her now with narrowed eyes. "Lucky day," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Even a broken clock is right twice a day." His friends laughed, but the sound had changed slightly. There was an edge of uncertainty in it now, like men whistling past a graveyard. Over the following days, the pattern continued. Kira arrived early, performed her tasks with quiet competence, and ignored the commentary that followed her everywhere. The mockery evolved, became more pointed. Someone left a pink rifle sling on her bunk. Another time, she found a pamphlet for a local cooking class tucked into her gear. She filed these incidents away mentally, said nothing, and continued hitting targets with the same unwavering consistency that had defined her performance since day one. By the end of the first week, Kira had established herself as reliable but unremarkable in the eyes of most of the training cadre. She hit her targets, followed orders precisely, and moved through the compound like a ghost. The other soldiers had mostly stopped trying to engage her in conversation, having learned that she offered nothing but polite, minimal responses that killed any attempt at banter. Coulter, however, had not stopped. If anything, his attention had intensified. During a classroom session on wind reading, he made a point of asking her opinion on a complex calculation, then cutting her off halfway through her answer to provide his own. When she demonstrated proper spotting technique with a training partner, he loudly suggested that maybe she should focus on the easier jobs and let the real snipers handle the shooting. His crew laughed on cue, a practice chorus of reinforcement. She absorbed it all without visible reaction, her face a mask of professional neutrality. The truth was, Kira had learned to compartmentalize at an early age. Growing up as the daughter of a SEAL team commander meant understanding that some things were better left unsaid. Her father had never needed to tell his teammates about his family life. He had simply done his job with excellence, and that excellence spoke louder than any words could. She had absorbed that lesson, watching him move through the world with quiet competence that demanded respect without ever demanding anything at all. When she was 16, he had taken her to the range for the first time with his service rifle. She could still remember the weight of it, the smell of gun oil and hot metal, the way he had positioned her hands with infinite patience. "Breathing is everything," he had told her. "Control your breath, control your heartbeat, control the shot. Everything else is just mathematics." She had hit the target dead center on her third try. He had smiled, just a slight curve of his lips, and said nothing. But that night at dinner, he had told her mother that their daughter had a gift. She had never forgotten the pride in his voice, quiet and understated, but absolutely genuine. That memory sustained her now as Coulter ramped up his campaign of dismissiveness. During a live-fire exercise in week 2, he made a show of offering to help her adjust her scope, implying that she clearly did not understand the equipment. She had declined politely and proceeded to score higher than him on the exercise. He claimed wind conditions had shifted in her favor. Morrison, Coulter's constant companion, had taken to calling her ghost, though not as a compliment. "She is so quiet. You forget she is even here," he told the others during evening downtime in the barracks common area. "Makes you wonder what she's even doing here. Probably filling some quota." The comment stung more than Kira let on, but she kept her face neutral and continued cleaning her rifle. The repetitive motion was soothing, familiar. Strip, clean, oil, reassemble. Her hands moved through the sequence with practiced efficiency while her mind drifted to her father's voice. "Never let them see you rattled, Kira. The moment you react, you have given them power over you." But there were cracks forming in her armor, small fissures that she tried to ignore. At night, alone in her bunk, she sometimes wondered if she should just speak up, just tell them who her father was, show them her actual qualification scores from previous postings. But that felt like cheating somehow, like using someone else's reputation instead of earning her own. The second week brought a new challenge. The training cadre introduced stress shoots, exercises designed to test performance under physical and mental pressure. Soldiers would complete an obstacle course, then immediately moved to the firing line and engaged targets while their hearts were pounding and their hands were shaking from exertion. Coulter went first, attacking the obstacles with aggressive energy. He cleared them in good time, then dropped into position and fired. His shots were solid, though not perfect. 2 hit center mass, 1 just outside the kill zone. He stood up grinning, chest heaving, clearly satisfied with his performance. Others followed with similar results. The obstacle course was brutal, and shooting accurately while physically exhausted was exponentially harder than shooting from a rested state. When Kira's turn came, she approached the course with the same measured calm she brought to everything else. She cleared the wall climb efficiently, moved through the tire run with quick feet, and navigated the low crawl without wasted motion. Her time was middle of the pack, nothing spectacular. But when she dropped into firing position, something shifted. Her breathing steadied almost immediately, falling into the rhythm her father had taught her years ago. The rifle became an extension of her body, familiar and comfortable despite the burning in her muscles and the sweat stinging her eyes. She fired 3 times in smooth succession. 3 perfect center mass hits. She stood, cleared her weapon, and walked back to the group. There was a moment of silence, broken only by the range safety officer calling out her scores. Coulter recovered first. "Well," he said with forced casualness, "even a blind squirrel finds a nut sometimes." His smile did not quite reach his eyes anymore. But something had changed. Kira could feel it in the weight of the stares that followed her now, could sense it in the way conversations stopped when she approached. Some of the soldiers were starting to wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was more to the quiet corporal than they had assumed. Morrison was not among them. During evening chow that night, he made a point of sitting at the table next to hers and speaking loudly enough to be overheard. "You know what I heard?" he said to his companions. "I heard they are lowering the standards for sniper school now. Gotta make sure everyone gets a participation trophy." The words landed exactly as intended. Kira felt her jaw tighten, felt the anger rising in her chest like a tide. But she kept eating, kept her eyes on her tray, and said absolutely nothing. Across the mess hall, she did not notice the figure who had just entered and was watching the entire exchange with narrowed eyes. Navy SEAL Colonel Marcus Hendricks had arrived at the training facility for an unannounced inspection, and he made a point of observing training environments without announcing his presence first. He wanted to see how things really ran, not how they looked when everyone was on their best behavior. And what he was seeing now made him very interested in learning more about the quiet corporal who was being so publicly dismissed by her peers. The 3rd week of training brought longer-range work, and with it, a new level of isolation for Kira. The compound had settled into a rhythm where she existed on the periphery of every group, acknowledged but never included. During meals, she sat alone or with whichever soldiers were too new to understand the social dynamics. During downtime, she stayed in her quarters or walked the perimeter of the facility, watching the sun set over the mountains. She told herself it did not matter. She was here to qualify, not to make friends. But the human part of her, the part she tried to keep buried under layers of professional discipline, sometimes ached with loneliness. Colonel Hendricks had remained at the facility longer than initially planned, though few people knew why. He had a habit of appearing at odd times, watching training exercises from a distance, reviewing records in the admin building late at night. Master Sergeant Voss assumed it was standard inspection protocol and thought nothing of it. During a morning brief on advanced ballistics, Hendricks slipped into the back of the classroom unannounced. The instructor, a weathered Marine gunnery sergeant named Pike, barely paused in his lecture about wind deflection and the Coriolis effect. The students were too focused on the complex mathematics to notice the colonel's presence. Pike called on various soldiers to solve equations on the board. When he pointed at Kira, Coulter shifted in his seat with visible anticipation. This was technical work, the kind that required both intuition and precise calculation, and he was clearly hoping she would stumble. She walked to the board, took the marker, and began working through the problem. A target at 1,300 meters, wind from the northwest at 12 miles per hour, temperature dropping, shooting uphill at a 15-degree angle. Her hand moved steadily across the board, breaking down each variable, accounting for spin drift and atmospheric pressure. The numbers flowed from her like water. When she finished, Pike studied her work for a long moment, then nodded. "That is correct, Corporal." He paused, then added, "That is also faster than I have seen anyone solve that particular problem." "Well done." Kira returned to her seat without comment, but she felt the weight of Colonel Hendrix's gaze following her. She did not know who he was yet, only that he wore the insignia of a SEAL officer and carried himself with the kind of authority that came from decades of hard-earned respect. That afternoon brought the moment that would crystallize the unit's hostility into something sharper and more deliberate. The exercise involved paired shooting, where one soldier would spot while the other engaged targets at varying distances. Kira was paired with a corporal named Davis, a quiet man from Tennessee who had been one of the few soldiers to treat her with basic courtesy. They worked well together, communicating efficiently and professionally. Coulter was paired with Morrison, and they set up at the station next to Kira and Davis. The targets began appearing at 800 meters, then 1,000, then 1,200. Kira and Davis hit consistently, their rhythm smooth and practiced. Coulter and Morrison struggled at the longer distances, Morrison's spotting calls growing increasingly frustrated as Coulter missed shots he should have made. When the exercise ended, the scores were posted. Kira and Davis had the highest combined total, with perfect hits at every distance. Coulter stared at the board for a long moment, his jaw working. Then he turned to Morrison and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Pretty convenient how she always performs better when someone is watching closely. Makes you wonder if Davis is doing more than just spotting for her." The implication hung in the air like poison gas. Davis's face went red. "That is completely out of line," he said, his Tennessee drawl thickening with anger. Coulter held up his hands in mock innocence. "Hey, I'm just saying what everyone is thinking. She shows up out of nowhere, never talks to anyone, and suddenly she is out scoring guys who have been doing this for years. Something does not add up." Other soldiers were watching now, and Kira could see the doubt creeping into some of their expressions. It was easier to believe she was cheating somehow than to accept that she might simply be better than them. She wanted to speak, wanted to defend herself, but the words caught in her throat. What could she say that would not sound like bragging or make things worse? So she did what she always did. She stayed silent, gathered her gear, and walked away. But the damage was done. By evening, the rumor had spread through the compound like wildfire. Some soldiers dismissed it as sour grapes from Coulter, but others wondered if maybe there was something to it. The isolation that had been uncomfortable before now felt suffocating. Davis found her later that night, sitting alone on a bench near the armory. He sat down without asking permission, his rifle case across his lap. "For what it is worth," he said quietly, "I know you did not cheat. You're just that good. I spotted every one of those shots, and they were all yours." "Thank you," she replied, and meant it. He nodded, then stood to leave. But he paused and looked back at her. "Why do you not tell them?" he asked. "Tell them what you can really do. Show them your actual record." She was quiet for a moment, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Because I should not have to," she finally said. "My work should speak for itself." Davis considered this, then nodded again. "Yeah," he said, "it should. But sometimes the world does not work the way it should." After he left, Kira sat alone in the darkness and wondered if he was right. Maybe she was being stubborn. Maybe she was making this harder than it needed to be. But every time she considered revealing her background, her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Earn your own respect, Kira. Never trade on someone else's reputation." What she did not know was that Colonel Hendrix had already begun his own investigation. That evening, he sat in Master Sergeant Voss's office with a file spread across the desk. It was Kira's complete service record, and it made for fascinating reading. Distinguished Marksmanship Badge at Basic Training. Top scores in Advanced Individual Training. Consecutive Expert Qualifications. Deployment Commendations. And buried deep in the file, a note about her father, a SEAL legend who had trained some of the finest shooters in naval special warfare before his retirement. Hendrix leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "Master Sergeant," he said slowly, "tell me about Corporal Thornwald. What do you see when you watch her shoot?" Voss frowned, thinking. "She's solid, sir. Consistent. Never flashy, but she hits what she aims at." "Why do you ask?" "Because," Hendricks said, closing the file, "I think we have been watching one of the finest natural marksmen I have ever seen, and nobody has bothered to notice." He stood up, his decision made. "Tomorrow, I want to run a special exercise. Unannounced. Extreme difficulty. And I want Corporal Thornwald front and center." The morning arrived with a tension that Kira could not quite name. She went through her usual routine with mechanical precision, rising before dawn, running the perimeter trail, showering, and arriving at the armory exactly 15 minutes before the scheduled formation. But something felt different today, like the air itself was holding its breath. The aftermath of Coulter's accusation had settled into the fabric of daily life at the facility. Some soldiers avoided her eyes now, uncomfortable with the ambiguity of the situation. Others, emboldened by Coulter's example, had begun making their own pointed comments. Morrison had taken to calling her princess, the word dripping with contempt every time it left his mouth. She absorbed it all with the same stoic silence that had become her armor, but the weight of it was accumulating. At night, alone in her bunk, she sometimes thought about her father and wondered what he would say if he could see her now. Would he be proud of her restraint? Or would he tell her that silence in the face of injustice was just another form of cowardice? The question haunted her, but she had no answer. When Master Sergeant Voss called formation that morning, there was something different in his bearing. He stood straighter than usual, and his eyes kept flicking toward the admin building where Colonel Hendricks had been spending most of his time. The soldiers assembled in neat rows, their curiosity palpable. "Change of schedule," Voss announced. "We have a special exercise today. Long-range precision work. Extreme conditions." His gaze swept across the formation and landed on Kira. Corporal Thornwald, front and center. She stepped forward, feeling every eye in the formation lock onto her. Coulter was watching with barely concealed satisfaction, clearly expecting this to be the moment where she would finally be exposed as a fraud. Morrison was grinning outright. Voss continued, his voice carrying across the assembled soldiers. "Colonel Hendricks has requested a demonstration of advanced marksmanship capabilities. He wants to see what our best shooters can do under pressure." He paused, letting the words sink in. "We will be engaging targets at 1,500 meters. Variable wind conditions. Limited time for setup and calculation." A murmur rippled through the formation. 1,500 meters was at the edge of what most of them could reliably hit, even under perfect conditions. With wind and time pressure, it would be extraordinarily difficult. Coulter stepped forward without being asked. "I will shoot, Sergeant." He glanced at Kira with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "Show everyone how it is supposed to be done." Voss looked like he wanted to say something, but a figure emerged from the admin building and the words died in his throat. Colonel Hendricks walked across the compound with measured steps, his uniform crisp despite the early morning heat. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had nothing left to prove to anyone. "Staff Sergeant Coulter," Hendricks said, his voice calm but carrying absolute authority. "You will have your opportunity. But Corporal Thornwald shoots first." He turned to face Kira directly for the first time. "Is that understood, Corporal?" "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. The group moved to the long-range facility, a stretch of desert that extended far into the distance with target stands placed at intervals marked by range flags. At 1,500 meters, the targets were barely visible, shimmering in the heat distortion that rose from the sand. Hendricks had arranged for wind flags to be placed at 300-meter intervals, and Kira could see them snapping and shifting in the gusting breeze. The wind was inconsistent, coming from multiple angles as it swirled around the terrain features. It was, she realized, deliberately the worst possible conditions for this kind of shot. She was given 5 minutes to set up, calculate, and fire 3 shots. Most of the soldiers watching assumed she would use every second of that time, frantically running numbers and second-guessing her adjustments. Instead, She dropped into position behind the rifle with fluid grace, her body settling into the familiar geometry of shooter and weapon. Her breathing slowed immediately, falling into the pattern that her father had drilled into her until it became as natural as her heartbeat. She studied the wind flags for 30 seconds, watching the patterns, reading the invisible currents of air that would carry her bullet across nearly a mile of distance. Then her eye dropped to the scope, and the world narrowed to a single point of focus. The first shot broke clean. Through the spotting scope, Davis watched the bullet impact dead center on the target. His voice cracked slightly as he called it. Hit. Center mass. The second shot followed 15 seconds later, adjusted for a wind shift that Kira had felt more than calculated. Another perfect hit. The third shot came after a longer pause, and some of the watching soldiers assumed she was struggling. But Kira was simply waiting, patient as stone, for the wind to settle into the pattern she needed. When it did, she fired without hesitation. 3 for 3. Perfect score. She stood, cleared her weapon, and stepped back from the line without celebration or comment. But inside, something was shifting. For the first time since arriving at this facility, she felt the tight knot of tension in her chest begin to loosen. Not because of the hits themselves, but because Colonel Hendricks was watching with eyes that actually saw her. Coulter moved to the line with aggressive confidence, clearly intending to match her performance and reclaim his position as the facility's alpha shooter. He took his position, ran his calculations, and began firing. His first shot hit low and left. His second shot overcorrected, going high and right. His third shot, fired in visible frustration, missed the target entirely. The silence that followed was crushing. Hendricks walked forward, his boots crunching on gravel. He stopped beside Coulter, who was still prone behind his rifle, staring downrange in disbelief. "Staff Sergeant," the colonel said quietly, "you are an adequate marksman, but adequate is not exceptional." He turned to address the entire formation, his voice carrying across the range. "Corporal Thornwald just demonstrated what exceptional looks like. I suggest you all pay attention." Coulter stood slowly, his face red with humiliation and barely contained rage. He looked at Kira with eyes that promised retribution, and she felt a cold certainty settle into her bones. This was not over. If anything, she had just made an enemy who would not rest until he found a way to tear her down. But for now, in this moment, she had proven something. Not to Coulter, not even to the watching soldiers who were reevaluating everything they thought they knew about the quiet corporal. She had proven it to herself, and that, she realized, was what mattered most. The week following the demonstration brought a subtle shift in the atmosphere at the training facility. Some soldiers began nodding to Kira in the corridors, acknowledging her presence with a respect that had been absent before. Davis now sat with her at meals regularly, and a few others had begun to join them, drawn by curiosity about the corporal who had made the impossible look routine. But Coulter's faction had hardened into something more dangerous. The humiliation of failing in front of a SEAL colonel had not tempered his hostility. It had refined it into something sharper, more calculated. He no longer made crude jokes or obvious provocations. Instead, he worked in whispers and implications, planting seeds of doubt that were harder to combat than outright accusations. "She got lucky with the wind that day," he told soldiers in the barracks when he thought she was out of earshot. "Anyone can hit a target once if conditions align. Consistency is what matters in the field." Morrison backed him up with unwavering loyalty. And Hendricks was watching her specifically, he added. She knew it was a test. Probably had extra time to prepare mentally. The rest of us were surprised by the whole thing. The narrative they were building was insidious because it contained just enough plausibility to take root. Kira heard the whispers, saw the skeptical looks returning to some faces, and felt the progress she had made beginning to erode. Colonel Hendricks observed all of this from his peripheral position, saying nothing but missing nothing. He had extended his stay at the facility indefinitely, citing operational reasons that Master Sergeant Voss did not question. In truth, he was conducting an experiment, watching to see how the social dynamics would evolve now that he had disrupted them. What he saw confirmed his initial assessment. The corporal was exceptional, but she was also isolated by her own reticence to defend herself. She reminded him of the best snipers he had ever worked with, the ones who understood that the weapon was secondary to the mind behind it. But she also reminded him of his own daughter, who had fought her whole life for recognition in spaces that did not want to grant it. The formal qualification round was scheduled for the end of week 4. This was the event that would determine final class standings and influence future assignments. Every soldier in the program had been working toward this moment, and the pressure was palpable. The qualification consisted of multiple stages. First, precision shooting at known distances from 300 to 1,000 meters. Second, unknown distance estimation and engagement. Third, timed rapid-fire drills. Fourth, and most critically, a comprehensive scenario that would test decision-making under pressure. The night before qualification, Kira sat in the facility's small chapel, a non-denominational room that was usually empty. She was not particularly religious, but the silence here was different from the silence of her quarters. It felt intentional, designed for reflection rather than isolation. She thought about her father, as she often did in quiet moments. He had died 2 years ago, a heart attack that took him in his sleep at the age of 62. Too young, everyone had said at the funeral. Too sudden, but he had lived more in his 60 years than most people lived in twice that time, and she took comfort in knowing that he had been proud of her when he left this world. Before his death, when she had told him she wanted to pursue sniper training, he had taken her hands in his and looked at her with those steady gray eyes that she had inherited. "You have the talent, Kira," he had said, "but talent alone is not enough. You need the patience to wait, the discipline to prepare, and the courage to perform when everything is on the line. Can you do that?" She had promised him she could. Now, sitting alone in the chapel, she renewed that promise to his memory. The qualification began at dawn with the precision stage. Soldiers rotated through the firing line in alphabetical order, which meant Kira shot early while others were still warming up. The targets were standard bullseye designs at marked distances, and she moved through them with mechanical efficiency. 300 meters, 500, 700, 1,000. Every shot found its mark with the same unwavering consistency that had defined her performance throughout training. When her scores were posted, they were perfect. A collective murmur went through the waiting soldiers, but Coulter simply shook his head and muttered something about how the real test came later. He was not wrong. The precision stage was the foundation, but the unknown distance work was where shooters truly proved themselves. Without range markers or clear references, they would have to estimate distance using terrain features, atmospheric conditions, and pure intuition, then make the shots count. Kira drew a scenario that placed her target on a hillside among scattered rocks and scrub brush. No obvious reference points, no helpful landmarks. Just a silhouette that could have been anywhere from 600 to 900 meters away. She settled behind her rifle and began the mental work. The target's apparent size suggested roughly 700 meters, but the uphill angle would affect the calculation. The air was hot and thin, which meant less drag on the bullet, but also more mirage distortion in the scope. She factored in the wind, the temperature, the barometric pressure her watch displayed. 740 meters, she decided. She adjusted her scope accordingly and sent the shot downrange. The spotter called it immediately. Hit. Dead center. She moved to the next target, another unknown distance, and repeated the process. This one was farther, maybe 850 meters, partially obscured by a depression in the terrain. She calculated, adjusted, fired. Another hit. By the time she completed the unknown distance stage, she had hit every target on her first shot. It was a performance that bordered on statistical improbability, and even some of the soldiers who had been sympathetic to Coulter's narrative were beginning to look at her with something approaching awe. Coulter's own performance was solid, but not exceptional. He missed one target, overcorrected on another, and finished with a score that would earn him a passing grade, but nothing more. His jaw was clenched so tightly by the end that the muscles in his neck stood out like cables. The timed rapid-fire drills came next. and this was where Coulter had always excelled. Speed shooting required a different skill set, trading some accuracy for volume of fire, and his aggressive style suited it perfectly. He blazed through his targets, hitting most of them, and finished with his best score of the day. When Kira's turn came, she approached the drill with the same measured calm she brought to everything else. Her shots were not as fast as Coulter's, but every single one found its mark. Where he had achieved speed at the cost of precision, she had maintained precision while still meeting the time requirements. The final scores at the end of the day told a story that was becoming impossible to ignore. Kira Thornwald stood alone at the top of the qualification board, her cumulative score higher than any other soldier in the program. Coulter was in third place, behind Davis, who had performed consistently well throughout the day. As the soldiers dispersed for evening chow, Coulter stood staring at the board for a long time. Morrison approached him cautiously, uncertain what to say. "Tomorrow," Coulter finally said, his voice low and hard. "Tomorrow is the scenario work. That is where we will see if she can actually perform under real pressure. Because hitting stationary targets on a sunny day is one thing. Making life and death decisions in chaos is something else entirely." What he did not say, but Morrison understood perfectly, was that Coulter had no intention of letting the scenario work proceed fairly. If Kira Thornwald was going to finish this program at the top of the rankings, she was going to have to overcome more than just difficult shots. She was going to have to overcome sabotage. The scenario phase of qualification was designed to test more than marksmanship. It evaluated judgment, adaptability, and the ability to function under the kind of pressure that existed only in combat. Each soldier would be placed in a simulated operation with multiple decision points, incomplete information, and consequences for both action and inaction. Colonel Hendricks had taken personal oversight of the scenario design, working late into the previous night with Master Sergeant Voss and the training cadre to create situations that would truly test these soldiers. He sat now in the observation tower, a fortified structure that overlooked the scenario range, watching through binoculars as the setup crews made final adjustments. Voss climbed the tower stairs and joined him, carrying 2 cups of black coffee. "Colonel," he said, handing one over, "the scenarios are ready. We start in 30 minutes. Hendricks accepted the coffee and took a long drink. "Tell me about Staff Sergeant Coulter," he said without preamble. Voss shifted uncomfortably. "He is a good soldier, sir. Strong shooter, natural leader. The men respect him." "That was not what I asked," Hendricks replied, his eyes still fixed on the range below. "I asked you to tell me about him, not his performance metrics. Him." The Master Sergeant was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "He has a problem with Corporal Thornwald, sir. Has from the moment she arrived. I think her performance threatens something in him, something he has built his identity around." Hendricks nodded slowly. "And what have you done about it?" Voss looked down at his coffee. "Not enough, sir. I told myself it was just typical barracks friction, that they would work it out. But watching it these past weeks, seeing how he has isolated her and undermined her at every turn, I realized I should have stepped in harder." "Yes," Hendricks said simply. "You should have. But we're going to correct that today." He turned to face Voss directly. "Corporal Thornwald goes last. I want her watching everyone else perform before it is her turn. And I want Staff Sergeant Coulter to know that I am watching him specifically." "Understood, sir." The scenarios began with the soldiers who had performed Middle Oath Pack during qualifications. They moved through situations involving hostage rescue, high-value target elimination, and urban warfare complications. Some soldiers performed well, making sound decisions under pressure. Others cracked, hesitating at critical moments or taking shots they should not have taken. Davis went early and performed solidly, his Tennessee calm serving him well when the scenario pressure mounted. He successfully navigated a situation where civilians were intermixed with hostile targets, making difficult judgment calls that prioritize human life while still completing the mission objectives. Coulter watched from the staging area with arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Morrison stood beside him, and the two of them spoke in low voices that Kira could not hear from where she sat on a bench 20 feet away. When Coulter's turn came, he He attacked the scenario with the same aggressive confidence he brought to everything else. His situation involved a time-critical shot on a target who was about to execute a hostage. He had to account for wind, distance, and the presence of innocent bystanders, all while a countdown timer added psychological pressure. He set up quickly, made his calculations, and took the shot. It was good, not great. The target went down, but the shot placement was slightly off-center and in a real situation might have allowed return fire. Still, he completed the objective and received a passing score. As he walked back to the staging area, he made eye contact with Kira for the first time that day. There was something in his expression that made her instinctively wary, a look of satisfaction that seemed out of proportion to his performance. More soldiers cycled through, and the morning stretched into early afternoon. The heat was oppressive now, and even in the shade of the staging area, Kira could feel sweat running down her back. She used the time to study the range, memorizing sight lines and terrain features that might become relevant in her own scenario. Finally, Master Sergeant Voss called her name. "Corporal Thornwald, you are up." She stood, collected her rifle, and moved to the starting point. An instructor briefed her on the scenario while Coulter and Morrison watched from the staging area. From the observation tower, Colonel Hendricks leaned forward, his full attention locked on what was about to unfold. The scenario was complex. Intelligence reports indicated a high-value target in a compound 700 meters distant. The target would appear briefly in one of 3 possible windows. Kira had to identify the correct target among several similar-looking individuals, account for the possibility of hostages, and take the shot within a narrow time window. Failure to act meant the target escaped. Acting incorrectly meant civilian casualties. But there was something else, something that had not been present in the scenarios the other soldiers had faced. As Kira moved into position and began setting up her rifle, she noticed immediately that her equipment felt wrong. The scope adjustment knobs were loose, far looser than they should have been. When she checked her ammunition, she found that someone had replaced her carefully sorted rounds with a mixed batch, different grain weights that would perform inconsistently. And when she tested the bolt action, it caught slightly, as if sand or grit had been introduced into the mechanism. Her mind went cold and clear. This was sabotage, deliberate and dangerous. She glanced back toward the staging area and saw Coulter watching her with that same satisfied expression. In the observation tower, Hendricks saw her pause and check her equipment. He lifted his binoculars and studied her face, seeing the moment of realization, watching to see how she would respond. Kira had a choice. She could call attention to the sabotage, halt the exercise, and demand an investigation. It would be the right thing to do, the proper procedure. But it would also mean admitting that she could not overcome an obstacle that her male peers had not faced. It would give Coulter exactly what he wanted, a reason to claim she needed special treatment or made excuses, or she could adapt and overcome, the way her father had taught her. She could take what she had been given and make it work anyway. The countdown began. She had 5 minutes to prepare before the scenario went live. She worked quickly, tightening the scope knobs as much as possible with her fingers, sorting through the ammunition to find rounds with matching characteristics, and clearing the bolt action by cycling it repeatedly until the grit had been pushed through. It was not perfect, far from it, but it was functional. When the scenario went live, she pushed everything else from her mind. The sabotage, the watching soldiers, the judgment that would follow regardless of her performance. All of it fell away until there was only the scope, the target, and the mathematics of sending a bullet exactly where it needed to go. The compound windows revealed 3 figures in rapid succession. The first was a woman carrying a child. The second was an elderly man. The third was her target, identifiable by the specific clothing details mentioned in the briefing. She adjusted for the loose scope, compensated for the inconsistent ammunition, and fired. Through the spotting scope, the range safety officer called a hit. Target down. Center mass. Mission successful. Kira cleared her weapon and stood, her heart hammering but her face composed. She walked back to the staging area in silence, while every soldier there stared at her with expressions ranging from respect to disbelief. Colonel Hendricks climbed down from the observation tower with deliberate steps. He walked past the assembled soldiers without acknowledging them and stopped directly in front of Coulter. "Staff Sergeant," he said quietly, his voice carrying none the less in the sudden silence. "Come with me. We need to discuss equipment maintenance protocols." Coulter's face went pale, and Kira understood in that moment that Hendricks had known. He had seen what happened, had watched her overcome it, and was now going to ensure there were consequences. But for now, standing in the desert heat with the weight of completed scenarios behind her, Kira allowed herself the smallest hint of satisfaction. She had not just passed the test. She had passed it while fighting with one hand tied behind her back. And everyone knew it. The evening following the scenario qualifications carried a strange tension through the compound. Coulter had not returned from his meeting with Colonel Hendricks, and Morrison had withdrawn to the barracks, avoiding eye contact with everyone. The other soldiers moved through their routines with unusual quiet, as if afraid that speaking too loudly might draw unwanted attention. Kira sat in the small facility library, a dusty room with outdated field manuals and dog-eared paperbacks that few people visited. She was not reading. She was simply sitting in the silence, processing what had happened and what it meant going forward. The sabotage had been obvious enough that Hendricks had noticed, which meant others must have seen it too. But no one had spoken up. No one had warned her or tried to stop it. That realization sat heavy in her chest. Davis found her there as the sun was setting, the last orange light streaming through the windows. He knocked on the door frame, even though the door was open, a courtesy she appreciated. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. She gestured to the chair across from her. He sat down heavily, his usual easy manner replaced with something more serious. "What Coulter did today was wrong," he said without preamble. "I want you to know that I did not know about it beforehand, but I suspected something when I saw him near the equipment staging area this morning. I should have said something. I should have checked your gear. I'm sorry." Kira studied him for a long moment. "Why are you apologizing to me? You are not the one who sabotaged my equipment." "No, but I stood by and let the climate exist where someone felt they could do that." Davis leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "This whole program, the way Coulter and Morrison have treated you from day one, the way the rest of us just watched it happen because it was easier than speaking up, that is on all of us, and I am ashamed of it." The honesty in his voice touched something in Kira that she had been keeping carefully locked away. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means more than you might think." They sat in silence for a moment before Davis spoke again. "The word is that Hendricks is recommending you for advanced SEAL sniper training. Top of the class, exemplary performance under adverse conditions, all of it." He paused. "They are also saying that Coulter is being removed from the instructor track and reassigned. His career is not over, but it is definitely stalled." Kira absorbed this information without visible reaction, but inside she felt a complex mix of relief and something else she could not quite name. She had never wanted to destroy Coulter's career. She had just wanted to be left alone to do her job. "How do you feel about it?" Davis asked, watching her carefully. "I feel tired," she admitted. "Tired of fighting for respect that should have been given freely. Tired of proving myself over and over while others get the benefit of the doubt from day one." She looked at him directly. "But I also feel grateful. For you. For the few others who treated me like a person instead of an inconvenience. That made the difference." Davis nodded, then stood to leave. "For what it is worth," he said, "I think your father would be proud of you. Not just for the shooting, but for how you have handled all of this with dignity." After he left, Kira sat alone with those words echoing in her mind. She thought about her father, about the lessons he had taught her both explicitly and through example. He had faced his own battles in a military that had not always valued what he brought to the table. He had overcome them through excellence and quiet persistence, never compromising his principles even when it would have been easier to do so. She realized now that this was the inheritance he had left her. Not just the skill with a rifle, but the understanding that sometimes the hardest battles were fought not against enemy combatants, but against the people who were supposed to be on your side. The next morning brought a formal assembly that no one had been expecting. The entire training company was called to formation in front of the headquarters building, with Colonel Hendricks standing at the center alongside Master Sergeant Voss and the senior training cadre. Hendricks waited until every soldier was present and standing at attention before he spoke. His voice carried across the formation with crisp authority. Yesterday, he began, we completed the scenario phase of advanced sniper qualification. Overall, the performance was acceptable. Many of you demonstrated the skills and judgment necessary to function as precision marksmen in combat environments. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled soldiers. However, yesterday also revealed a failure of leadership and unit cohesion that I cannot and will not tolerate. The formation tensed. Kira stood at attention in the front rank, her eyes fixed straight ahead, but she could feel the weight of dozens of stares on her back. Equipment sabotage is not just a violation of regulations, Hendricks continued. It is a betrayal of the trust that must exist between soldiers who depend on each other in life and death situations. It represents a moral failing that has no place in any unit I oversee. He let that sink in before continuing. Staff Sergeant Coulter has been removed from this program and reassigned. The details of his reassignment are not your concern. What is your concern is understanding why this happened and ensuring it never happens again. Hendricks began walking slowly along the front rank, making eye contact with each soldier he passed. A culture of hostility and exclusion was allowed to flourish here, he said. Soldiers were targeted and undermined not because of performance deficiencies, but because of personal prejudices. And the rest of you, he stopped walking and turned to face the entire formation, allowed it to happen through your silence. The words hit like physical blows. Kira could see soldiers shifting uncomfortably, could sense the collective guilt settling over the formation. Corporal Thornwald, Hendricks said, and Kira's spine straightened even further. Step forward. She moved with precise steps until she was standing directly in front of the colonel. He looked at her with those piercing eyes that seemed to see everything. This soldier, he said, addressing the formation but keeping his gaze on Kira, has demonstrated not only exceptional marksmanship, but exceptional character. She has faced hostility, sabotage, and isolation with a professionalism that should be the standard for all of you. He turned to face the formation again. Yesterday, she completed a complex scenario with equipment that had been deliberately compromised. She did not make excuses. She did not demand special consideration. She adapted and overcame, achieving a perfect score under conditions that would have caused most shooters to fail. Hendricks reached into his pocket and withdrew a small case. He opened it to reveal a distinguished marksman badge, the highest level of recognition for shooting excellence. Corporal Thornwald, he said formally, it is my privilege to recognize your achievement as the top graduate of this advanced sniper qualification course. Your performance has been exemplary in every measurable category, and your conduct has been a model of military bearing under adverse circumstances. He pinned the badge on her uniform while the formation watched in absolute silence. When he stepped back and saluted her, she returned it with crisp precision, her face composed but her eyes bright with emotion she could no longer completely suppress. The formation was dismissed, and, as soldiers dispersed, something had fundamentally changed. The few who had been sympathetic to Coulter's narrative now looked ashamed. Others approached Kira tentatively, offering congratulations that were clearly sincere even if they came too late to erase what had happened before. But the moment that mattered most came when a young private, barely 20 years old, approached her with nervous determination. "Corporal," he said, his voice uncertain but earnest, "I just wanted to say that watching you these past weeks taught me something important. You showed me that excellence does not need to be loud. That real strength does not need constant validation." He swallowed hard. "I am sorry I did not stand up for you when I should have. But I promise I will not make that mistake again with you or anyone else." Kira looked at this young soldier, saw the genuine remorse in his face, and felt something loosen in her chest. "Thank you," she said simply. "That is all any of us can do. Learn and do better." As the private walked away, Davis appeared at her side with a rare smile. "Top of the class," he said. and a personal commendation from a SEAL colonel. Not a bad way to finish. No, Kira agreed, allowing herself a small smile in return. Not bad at all. But even as she spoke, she knew this was not really an ending. It was a beginning. The recognition she had earned here would open doors, would take her places she had only dreamed about. And wherever she went next, she would carry with her the lessons learned in this crucible. She would carry her father's legacy of quiet excellence. And she would carry the knowledge that sometimes the hardest victories were the ones fought not with rifles, but with unwavering dignity in the face of those who wanted to break you. The days following the formal recognition ceremony carried a different energy through the training facility. Kira found herself no longer eating alone, no longer walking the compound in isolation. Soldiers who had previously avoided her now sought her advice on technique, asked questions about wind reading and ballistic calculations, treated her with the professional courtesy that should have been there from the beginning. It was validating, but it also felt bittersweet. She had not changed. Her skills had been the same on day one as they were now. What had changed was everyone else's willingness to see what had been in front of them all along. Colonel Hendricks had remained at the facility for another week, ostensibly to complete his inspection, but really to ensure the cultural correction he had implemented would take root. He spent his mornings observing training exercises and his afternoons in meetings with the cadre leadership, making it clear that the standards were changing permanently. On a Thursday afternoon, he summoned Kira to his temporary office in the admin building. She arrived exactly on time, knocked once, and entered when he called for her to come in. "At ease, Corporal," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. She sat, her posture still military, but no longer rigid with tension. Hendricks studied her for a moment before speaking. "I have been reviewing your complete service record," he said. "It makes for interesting reading. Your father was Thomas Thornwald, correct? SEAL Team 3, retired as a Master Chief?" "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice steady despite the sudden spike in her heartbeat. "I served with him briefly in the early 2000s. Afghanistan. He was one of the finest combat instructors I ever worked with." Hendricks leaned back in his chair. "I am curious why you never mentioned this connection. It would have made your time here considerably easier." Kira chose her words carefully. "My father taught me that respect should be earned through my own actions, sir, not borrowed from his reputation. If I had mentioned him every time someone questioned my abilities, I would have been trading on his legacy instead of building my own." Hendricks nodded slowly, something like approval flickering in his expression. "That is a mature perspective, Corporal, and it speaks well of both you and how he raised you. But there is a difference between trading on someone's reputation and acknowledging the foundation they provided. Your father gave you an extraordinary education in marksmanship and tactical thinking. There is no shame in recognizing that." "I understand, sir." "Good, because I did not call you here to discuss your father. I called you here to discuss your future." He pulled a folder from his desk drawer and opened it. "I am recommending you for the Naval Special Warfare Sniper course at Camp Pendleton. It is the most advanced precision shooting program in the military, and graduates go on to support SEAL teams in combat operations. Based on your performance here, I believe you would excel." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Kira had heard about the NSW Sniper course, knew it was considered the pinnacle of American military marksmanship training. It was also notoriously difficult, with a failure rate that exceeded 50% even among the elite candidates who were invited to attend. "I will be honored, sir," she said. "The course begins in 6 weeks," Hendricks continued. "Between now and then, I want you to continue training here, but with a specific focus on advanced techniques. Long-range shooting at extreme distances, moving targets, low-light conditions. Master Sergeant Voss will work with you personally to prepare." He paused. "I will be frank, Corporal. This course is not just physically demanding. It is psychologically brutal. The instructors will push you harder than you have ever been pushed, specifically to see if you will break. What happened here with Coulter will seem like a mild inconvenience compared to what you will face there." "I understand, sir." "Do you?" Hendricks leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Because I need you to understand something else. If you go to this course and fail, There will be people who use that failure to justify their prejudices about women in combat roles. That is not fair, and it should not be your burden to carry, but it is the reality. You let that sink in. So I'm asking you directly, are you prepared for that level of pressure? Kira thought about her father, about the lessons he had taught her, about the weight of expectation that had followed her throughout her entire military career. She thought about the mockery she had endured, the sabotage she had overcome, and the quiet satisfaction of proving doubters wrong through simple excellence. "Sir," she said, meeting his gaze directly, "I have been carrying that burden my entire life. The only difference now is that I am better equipped to handle it." Hendrik smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him. "Your father will be proud of that answer." He closed the folder and stood, extending his hand. "Congratulations, Corporal Thornwald. I look forward to hearing about your success at Pendleton." She shook his hand, feeling the firm grip of someone who understood exactly what she was about to face. "Thank you, sir. I will not let you down." After she left the office, Kira walked across the compound in a daze, processing what had just happened. The NSW sniper course. It was an opportunity that most soldiers could only dream about, and she had just been handed a direct path to it. Davis found her sitting on the bench near the armory, staring out at the desert landscape that had become so familiar over the past weeks. He sat down beside her without asking, and they were quiet for a while before he spoke. "I heard," he said simply. "Hendricks told Voss, and Voss mentioned it to a few of us. NSW sniper course. That is major." "Yeah," she replied. "It is. You're going to crush it," Davis said with certainty. "I have watched you shoot for weeks now, and I have never seen anyone with your combination of technical skill and mental discipline. Those instructors at Pendleton are going to take one look at your performance and wonder where you have been hiding." Kira smiled despite herself. "I appreciate the confidence. It is not confidence. It is just facts." He stood up and looked down at her with that easy Tennessee grin. "But I'm going to miss having you around here. It has been nice having someone who actually takes this stuff seriously instead of treating it like a competition to see who can talk the loudest." "I'm going to miss you too," she said, and meant it. "You were one of the few people here who treated me like a human being from the start. That mattered more than you know." They shook hands, and Davis walked away, leaving Kira alone with her thoughts. She sat there as the sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple, and thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought about her father, teaching her to shoot in the early morning light, his patience infinite as she learned to control her breathing and her heartbeat. She thought about the day she had enlisted, the pride in his eyes tempered with concern about the challenges she would face. She thought about his funeral, standing at attention in her dress uniform while they folded the flag and handed it to her mother, knowing that he had given her everything she needed to succeed in this world. And she thought about Coulter, about Morrison, about all the soldiers who had made her time here harder than it needed to be. She felt no satisfaction in Coulter's reassignment, no sense of victory in how things had unfolded. She simply felt tired of fighting battles that should never have needed to be fought. But that tiredness was not weakness. It was clarity. She understood now that excellence alone was not enough, that she would have to continue proving herself over and over, that there would always be another Coulter waiting to test her resolve. And she was ready for it, not because she wanted the fight, but because she knew she could win it, not through aggression or confrontation, but through the same quiet competence that had always been her greatest weapon. The distinguished marksman badge on her uniform caught the last rays of sunlight, glinting like a promise. She touched it briefly, feeling the metal warm under her fingers, and made a silent vow to the memory of her father. She would go to Camp Pendleton. She would face whatever challenges the NSW sniper course threw at her, and she would succeed, not to prove anything to anyone else, but to honor the legacy he had entrusted to her. The quiet excellence that needed no validation, but earned respect through undeniable demonstration. That was the Thornwald way, and she would carry it forward one perfect shot at a time. The 6 weeks between the completion of advanced sniper qualification and the start of the NSW course passed in a blur of intensive preparation. Master Sergeant Voss had taken his assignment to train Kira seriously, designing a regimen that pushed her capabilities to their absolute limits and then demanded she reach further. They worked before dawn and after sunset, taking advantage of low-light conditions that made shooting exponentially more difficult. Voss set up targets at distances that seemed impossible, then watched impassively as Kira calculated wind drift, temperature effects, and bullet drop for shots that stretched beyond 1,500 meters. "You need to understand something," he told her one morning as they hiked to a remote ridge for extreme long-range work. "The instructors at Pendleton are not looking for good shooters. They have plenty of those. They are looking for soldiers who can perform miracles under pressure, who can make shots that should not be possible, and who never quit even when every rational part of their brain is screaming at them to give up." "I understand," Sergeant Kira replied, adjusting the weight of the heavy rifle case on her back. "I'm not sure you do," Voss continued. "They are going to try to break you. Not because they are cruel, but because they need to know you will not break in combat when lives depend on you. And as a female candidate, they're going to push you even harder. They will be watching for any sign of weakness, any indication that you are not up to the standard. Then I will not give them one," she said simply. Voss smiled grimly. "Your father said almost the exact same thing to me once back when I was going through my own advanced training. He was one of my instructors. Did you know that?" Kira stopped walking and turned to look at him. "No, Sergeant, I did not. He was hell on wheels in the training environment, demanded perfection and would not accept anything less. But he also had this way of seeing potential in people that others missed. He pushed me harder than anyone else because he knew I could take it." Voss met her eyes directly. "I see that same potential in you, Corporal. That is why I'm pushing you the way I am." The training intensified. Voss created scenarios that combined physical exhaustion with precision shooting, forcing Kira to make difficult shots after running obstacle courses, after carrying heavy loads for miles, after being subjected to stress positions that made her muscles scream. He timed everything, creating pressure that simulated the compressed decision-making windows of actual combat. One particular exercise stood out. Voss had her hike 8 miles into the desert carrying a 60-pound pack, set up a hide site, and remain in position for 12 hours observing a target area. Then, with no warning and no chance to rest or prepare mentally, he gave her 30 seconds to engage a target at 1,400 meters in variable wind conditions. She made the shot, but barely. The bullet struck just outside the kill zone, and Voss made her repeat the entire exercise the next day. And the day after that, and the day after that, until she could execute the shot perfectly regardless of how exhausted or uncomfortable she was. "This is what they will do to you at Pendleton," he explained. "They will grind you down physically and mentally until you are running on pure discipline and muscle memory. If your fundamentals are not absolutely solid, you will fail. So we are making sure your fundamentals are unshakable." During the evening hours, when the training day was officially over, Kira studied. She read every manual she could find on advanced marksmanship, ballistics, and tactical operations. She memorized data tables for different ammunition types, atmospheric conditions, and range estimation techniques. She watched videos of championship shooters and military snipers, analyzing their techniques and looking for insights she could incorporate into her own approach. Davis checked in on her regularly, bringing her meals when she forgot to eat, forcing her to take breaks when Voss was not around to enforce them. "You are going to burn yourself out before you even get to Pendleton," he warned her one evening, finding her in the library at midnight with textbooks spread across the table. "I am fine," she insisted, though the exhaustion was evident in her voice. "Kira, you have been training for 16 hours today. That is not fine. That is obsessive." He sat down across from her. "I know you feel like you have something to prove, but you have already proven it. Everyone here knows you are exceptional. You do not need to run yourself into the ground." She looked up from her books, and Davis saw something in her expression that made him go quiet. "It is not about proving anything to anyone here," she said softly. "It is about being ready for what comes next. My father used to say that in combat, you do not rise to the occasion. You fall to the level of your training. If my training is not good enough, then I will fail when it matters most. Your training is already better than 99% of soldiers will ever achieve. Then I need to be in the 1%, she replied, returning her attention to the books. Davis sighed, but did not argue further. He understood that she had made a decision about who she needed to be, and nothing he said would change that. So instead, he just sat with her, keeping her company in the late-night silence, offering support in the only way she seemed willing to accept. As the departure date approached, Kira began to feel something shifting inside her. The anger and frustration that had defined so much of her time at this facility was fading, replaced by a sense of purpose that felt cleaner, more focused. She had survived the crucible of hostility and sabotage. She had proven herself capable of excellence under the worst possible conditions. Now, she was heading towards something greater, and for the first time in her military career, she felt truly ready. 3 days before her departure, Colonel Hendricks returned to the facility for a final visit. He found Kira on the range, working through a drill that Voss had designed to simulate multiple target engagement under time pressure. She completed the drill flawlessly, then turned to find the colonel watching from the observation point. She approached and saluted, which he returned with his characteristic precision. "Are you ready, Corporal?" he asked without preamble. "I am, sir." "Good, because I received a call from the course director at Pendleton yesterday. He has reviewed your file and is very interested to see what you can do." He paused, then added, he also mentioned that there has been some discussion among the cadre about whether a female candidate can meet the physical standards of the course. He wanted me to know that they will be watching you carefully. Kira felt a flash of familiar frustration, but pushed it down. "With respect, sir, they can watch all they want. I will meet the standards." "I know you will," Hendricks said, "but I want you to remember something. Your father once told me that the greatest strength a sniper can have is not physical power or even technical skill. It is patience, the ability to wait, to endure discomfort and pressure, to remain absolutely committed to the mission even when everything inside you wants to quit." He looked at her directly. "You have that quality, Corporal. I have watched you demonstrate it repeatedly over these past weeks. Trust it." The words settled into Kira like a benediction, a final gift from her father delivered through this man who had known him and understood what he had been trying to teach her. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice thick with emotion she did not try to hide. "I will make you proud. Both of you." "You already have," Hendricks replied. "Now, go show Pendleton what quiet excellence looks like." The night before her departure, Kira packed her gear with methodical care, folding each item precisely, checking and rechecking her equipment list. She slept poorly, her mind racing through everything she had learned, everything she still needed to prove, everything that waited for her at Camp Pendleton. When dawn broke over the desert, she was already awake, standing outside the barracks with her duffel bag at her feet, watching the sun paint the mountains in shades of gold and orange. Davis appeared beside her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "For the road," he said, handing her one. They stood in comfortable silence, drinking coffee and watching the desert wake up. Finally, Davis spoke. "Whatever happens at Pendleton, I want you to know that you changed things here. The way the cadre thinks about training, the way soldiers think about excellence, all of it. You made a difference." "I hope so," Kira replied. "I hope the next woman who comes through here has an easier time than I did." "She will," Davis said with certainty, "because you showed everyone what was possible when they stopped standing in the way." The transport arrived, and Kira shouldered her bag. She shook hands with Davis, with Voss who had come to see her off, with several other soldiers who had gathered to wish her luck. Then she climbed into the vehicle and did not look back. She was done looking back. The only direction that mattered now was forward, toward Camp Pendleton, toward the NSW sniper course, toward the future she was going to build with her own hands and her father's legacy. The quiet sniper was heading to the loudest test of her life, and she was ready. Camp Pendleton sprawled across the California coastline like a small city dedicated entirely to the art of warfare. Kira arrived on a Monday morning in early autumn, the Pacific Ocean visible in the distance, salt air mixing with the smell of dust and ordnance that seemed to permeate every military installation she had ever visited. The NSW Sniper Course compound was isolated from the main base, a collection of buildings and ranges that looked deliberately austere. No comfort, no distraction, nothing but the work ahead. Kira checked in at the administration building, received her barracks assignment, and was told to report to the classroom building at 0600 the following morning. There were 23 candidates in the course, and Kira was the only woman. She knew this before she arrived, had prepared herself for it. But the reality of walking into the classroom and feeling 22 pairs of eyes lock onto her still sent a jolt of adrenaline through her system. She chose a seat in the middle of the room, not trying to hide in the back, but not pushing to the front either. Just present, professional, ready to work. Several of the men nodded to her in greeting. Others studied her with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. One man in particular, a Navy SEAL with combat ribbons and the weathered look of someone who had seen serious action, watched her with narrowed eyes that held clear doubt. The lead instructor entered at precisely 0600. He was a Master Chief Petty Officer named Rains, a legend in the sniper community with confirmed kills that numbered in the triple digits across multiple deployments. He stood at the front of the room and let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. "Welcome to the Naval Special Warfare Sniper Course," he finally said, his voice rough as gravel. "Over the next 10 weeks, we are going to determine which of you have what it takes to support SEAL operations in the most demanding shooting environments on Earth. The attrition rate for this course is 58%. More than half of you will fail. You let that sink in. We do not care about your previous qualifications. We do not care about your recommendations. The only thing that matters is what you do here, starting now." His eyes swept the room and landed on Kira. "We have a female candidate this cycle," he said flatly. "That is a first for this course. Some of you might wonder if the standards will be adjusted. Let me make this absolutely clear. There is one standard, and it applies to everyone equally. If you cannot meet it, you will be removed from the course regardless of what is between your legs." He shifted his gaze to the rest of the class. "And if any of you think you can coast because you are a SEAL or because you have combat experience, you are in for a very unpleasant surprise. This course will break you if you let it." The first 2 weeks were designed to establish baseline capabilities and weed out candidates who did not belong. Classroom work on advanced ballistics, meteorology, and range estimation. Physical training that pushed everyone to their limits. Basic marksmanship drills that seemed simple until the instructors added time pressure, physical exhaustion, and psychological stress. Kira performed well, consistently in the top tier of the class, but she was careful not to stand out too much. She had learned from her experience at Fort Bragg that being too visible could invite unwanted attention. Better to be solidly excellent than flashily spectacular. The SEAL who had watched her with skepticism on the first day was named Chief Petty Officer Briggs. He was a career sniper with multiple deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had earned every inch of respect he received. During a lunch break in week 2, he approached Kira while she was reviewing ballistic tables. "Corporal," he said, his tone neutral. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, Chief. Why are you here? Not why did you join the course, but why do you want to be a sniper?" He sat down across from her, his expression genuinely curious rather than hostile. "Because this is not a job that gets you recognition or glory. It is long hours of discomfort followed by brief moments of absolute terror. It is being alone on a ridge while your teammates are in the valley. It is living with the weight of every shot you take." "So why?" Kira considered the question carefully. "My father was a SEAL," she said. "Master Chief Thomas Thornwald. He taught me to shoot when I was young, and I discovered I had a gift for it. But more than that, I understood what it meant. The patience, the discipline, the acceptance that your contribution might never be acknowledged, but was critical nonetheless." She met his eyes directly. "I am here because I am good at this, Chief, and because I believe I can save lives by being in the right place at the right time with the right skills." Briggs nodded slowly. "Tom Thornwald was your father?" "I knew him. Not well, but I knew him. He was one of the best." He paused, then extended his hand. "If you're half the shooter he was, you will do fine here. Welcome to the course, Corporal." The handshake meant more than Kira expected. Briggs carried weight in the SEAL community, and his acceptance sent a signal to the other students that she was legitimate. The atmosphere shifted subtly after that conversation, skepticism giving way to cautious respect. But the course was designed to break down that respect and test what remained underneath. Week 3 brought sleep deprivation exercises, where candidates were kept awake for 72 hours straight while still being required to perform complex calculations and precision shooting. Week 4 introduced water training. Long swims in the cold Pacific followed immediately by shooting drills that tested their ability to control shaking muscles and maintain accuracy. Kira struggled during the water work, her smaller frame making it harder to maintain body heat in the cold ocean. She finished the swims, but barely, and her shooting immediately afterward was less precise than her usual standard. She could see the instructors taking notes, could feel the pressure mounting. Master Chief Rains pulled her aside after one particularly difficult session. "Corporal, you're falling behind on the water drills. Your swim times are acceptable, but your post-swim shooting is below standard. What are you going to do about it?" She was shivering despite the blanket wrapped around her shoulders, but her voice was steady. "I'm going to train harder, Master Chief. I will do extra swims on my own time until my body adapts." "That is the right answer," he said. "But understand that we cannot give you extra time to recover. In combat, the ocean does not care if you are cold or tired. The shot still has to be made." "I understand, Master Chief." "Good, because I received a call from Colonel Hendricks specifically recommending you for this course. I did not want to have to tell him you washed out, because you could not handle a little cold water." The words stung, but they also ignited something fierce inside her. That night, after the official training day ended, she went back to the pool and swam laps in the cold water until her limbs felt like lead. Then she went to the range and shot in the darkness, forcing her shaking hands to steady, forcing her mind to override the discomfort of her body. She did this every night for a week, pushing through exhaustion and cold until her body began to adapt, until she could maintain her shooting standard even when hypothermic and exhausted. When the next water drill came, she completed the swim in improved time and then proceeded to shoot a perfect score on the follow-up marksmanship test. Master Chief Rains watched without comment, but she saw the slight nod of approval, the almost imperceptible acknowledgement that she had done what needed to be done. Week 5 brought the first major elimination event: long-range precision shooting at distances exceeding 2,000 meters, conditions deliberately difficult, multiple shots required on multiple targets. Candidates who failed to meet the minimum standard would be removed from the course immediately. Kira spent the night before the test in quiet preparation, not studying or practicing, but simply breathing and centering herself. She thought about her father, about all the lessons he had given her, about the legacy she carried. She thought about Fort Bragg and Coulter and the sabotage she had overcome. She thought about Colonel Hendricks's words about patience being a sniper's greatest strength. When morning came, she was ready. Not nervous, not excited, just ready. The test began at dawn, and one by one the candidates took their positions and engaged their targets. Some succeeded, some failed. The failures were quiet, professional, but final. They gathered their gear and left the course without ceremony. When Kira's turn came, she settled into position behind a rifle and felt the familiar calm descend over her. The world narrowed to wind and distance, and the simple mathematics of sending a bullet exactly where it needed to go. She fired her first shot at 2,100 meters. Dead center hit. The second target appeared at an angle, partially obscured by terrain. She calculated, adjusted, fired. Another hit. A third target at maximum range, 2,300 meters, wind gusting and unpredictable. She waited, patient as stone, watching the wind flags, feeling the patterns, trusting her training and her instincts. When the moment came, she fired. Through the spotting scope, Master Chief Rains watched the bullet arc across nearly a mile and a half of California desert and strike the target dead center. He lowered the scope and looked at Kira with an expression that might have been the beginning of respect. "That," he said quietly, so only she could hear, is what exceptional looks like. Your father would be proud, Corporal. The weeks following the elimination test brought a shift in how the remaining candidates viewed each other. The class had been reduced from 23 to 14, and those who remained understood they were among the best. The competitive tension eased slightly, replaced by a sense of shared purpose. They were no longer fighting against each other. They were fighting against the course itself. Kira had proven herself in the most objective way possible, through undeniable performance under pressure. Chief Briggs now included her in the informal study groups that the SEAL candidates formed in the evenings, discussing tactics and technique with the same professional courtesy he extended to everyone else. Others followed his lead, and for the first time since joining the military, Kira felt like she was part of a team rather than an outsider fighting for acceptance. But the course was far from over, and the instructors seemed determined to test every possible breaking point. Week 7 introduced fieldcraft and stalking exercises, where candidates had to move undetected across open terrain while observers with high-powered optics try to spot them. It was brutal, slow work that required infinite patience and physical discomfort. Kira excelled at this phase. Her smaller frame was actually an advantage, making it easier to hide behind minimal cover, and her natural patience allowed her to remain motionless for hours at a time. She completed stalks that some of the larger male candidates struggled with, moving like a ghost across terrain that seemed to offer no concealment. Master Chief Rains watched her final stalk from the observation post, tracking her progress through his optics. Or rather, failing to track her progress. She had simply vanished into the landscape, and it was only when she fired the required blank round from her final firing position, less than 200 meters from his location, that he realized how close she had gotten without being detected. "Outstanding," he said into his radio. "Corporal Thornwald, you just executed one of the finest stalks I've seen in 15 years of running this course." Recover to the assembly area. That evening, as the candidates gathered for the daily debrief, Rains addressed the class with unusual directness. "Today, Corporal Thornwald demonstrated something I want all of you to understand. Being a sniper is not about being the biggest or the strongest. It is about being invisible. It is about patience and discipline and the willingness to endure discomfort without complaint." He looked directly at Kira. "Some of you came into this course thinking that combat experience or physical size would be your advantage. Today, you learned that in this discipline, other qualities matter more." The room was silent, but Kira could feel the weight of attention on her. Not hostile or skeptical anymore, just attentive, respectful, acknowledging what she had demonstrated. Week 8 brought night shooting, one of the most technically demanding aspects of sniper work. Engaging targets in darkness with only ambient light or night vision required a completely different skill set, and many candidates struggled with the transition. Equipment that worked perfectly in daylight became temperamental at night. Range estimation became guesswork. Wind reading relied more on feel than observation. Kira found the night work fascinating. It required a different kind of focus, a heightened awareness of subtle cues that disappeared in the visual noise of daylight. She spent extra hours on the range after the official training ended, teaching herself to read the night, to understand how darkness changed everything about the shooting equation. Chief Briggs joined her one evening, carrying his own rifle and settling into position on the firing line beside her. "Mind if I work alongside you?" he asked. "Not all, Chief." They shot together in comfortable silence for an hour, the only sounds their breathing and the occasional crack of rifle fire. Finally, Briggs spoke without taking his eye from his scope. "You remind me of your father, you know, not just in your shooting, but in how you approach the work." He had this quality of absolute focus, like nothing else in the world existed except the task in front of him. "You have that same quality." "Thank you, Chief. That means more than you might think." "He's been gone 2 years now, right?" "Yes. Heart attack. Very sudden. I am sorry. The community lost a good man." Briggs adjusted his position slightly. "For what it is worth, I think you would be incredibly proud of what you're doing here. Not just making it through the course, but how you are doing it. With dignity and professionalism. even when it would be easier to quit or complain. Kira felt emotion rising in her throat, but pushed it down. "I had good teachers," she said simply. They continued shooting into the night. Two professionals honing their craft in the darkness, connected by shared purpose and mutual respect. Week 9 brought the final major test before graduation. A comprehensive field exercise that combined everything they had learned: long-range precision shooting, stalking, night work, environmental adaptation, decision-making under pressure, and physical endurance. The candidates would be evaluated individually over a 7-Titwohor period, with minimal sleep and constant pressure. Kira drew a scenario that placed her in a mountainous environment, tasked with conducting reconnaissance on a simulated enemy compound and taking specific shots when certain conditions were met. She would have to move several miles on foot carrying full gear, establish a hide site, conduct surveillance for extended periods, and then execute precision shots at extreme range before extracting undetected. The scenario began at midnight on a Monday. By Tuesday afternoon, Kira had been awake for 38 hours. Lying in a hide site she had painstakingly constructed on a rocky hillside overlooking the target compound. Her body ached from the motionless position. Her eyes burned from the constant surveillance through her scope. But her mind remained sharp, cataloging patterns and waiting for the specific indicators that would trigger her shot sequence. The shot opportunity came on Tuesday evening. A figure appeared at the designated window, wearing the identifying markers that indicated he was the high-value target. Range was 1,900 meters. Wind was variable and complex, swirling around the terrain features in unpredictable patterns. The light was fading, not quite dark enough for night vision, but dim enough to make visual confirmation difficult. Kira controlled her breathing and waited, patient as stone, watching the wind flags she had memorized during her surveillance period, feeling the patterns. The figure remained in position for 45 seconds, well within the time window for a shot, but she did not rush. She waited for the exact moment when all variables aligned. When that moment came, she fired. The suppressed rifle made barely a sound, and through her scope she watched the target marker activate, indicating a confirmed hit. She remained in position for another 6 hours, conducting surveillance to ensure she had not been compromised, then executed her extraction route, moving through the darkness like a shadow. She reached the extraction point at 0400 Wednesday morning, 52 hours into the exercise, exhausted but successful. Master Chief Rains was waiting there personally, which was unusual. Normally, the evaluators maintained distance during field exercises. "Corporal Thornwald," he said as she approached. "That was a textbook operation from start to finish. Your hide site was nearly invisible. Your shot was perfect under extremely difficult conditions. And your extraction was ghost quiet." He paused, then added something that might have been approval or might have been simple acknowledgement of fact. "You just executed that scenario better than any candidate I have seen in 3 years." "Thank you, Master Chief," she replied, too tired to feel the full weight of what he was saying. "Get some rest. Final evaluations are in 48 hours, and you still have to pass the written exam and the final shooting test. But based on what I have seen, you're going to graduate from this course. And when you do, you're going to be one of the finest snipers in naval special warfare." The words settled into Kira like a benediction, a validation of everything she had endured and overcome. But she was too disciplined to celebrate prematurely. The course was not over until it was over, and she would not allow herself to relax until she had crossed the finish line. The final 48 hours passed in a haze of preparation. Written exams covering tactical doctrine, ballistics, and operational planning. Final shooting tests that synthesized all the skills they had developed. Physical fitness assessments to ensure they maintained standards despite the exhaustion of the course. Kira moved through each requirement with the same methodical precision she brought to everything else. Not perfect, but consistently excellent. Not flashy, but undeniably competent. The quiet excellence that had defined her from the beginning. When the final scores were posted on Friday afternoon, she stood among the remaining 12 candidates, down from the original 23, and read the board with a sense of surreal accomplishment. She had not just passed, She had finished second in the overall class rankings, behind only Chief Briggs, who had years of combat experience and previous sniper training. Among the candidates without prior sniper experience, she was first, and in several specific categories, including fieldcraft and long-range precision, she had achieved the highest scores in the class. Chief Briggs approached her as the candidates dispersed, a rare smile on his weathered face. "Second place to a crusty old SEAL with 12 years of trigger time," he said. "I would say that is pretty damn impressive, Corporal." "I learned from the best, Chief," she replied. "Your father would be proud." "Hell, I am proud, and I barely know you. You did not just complete this course. You excelled at it." He extended his hand. "It has been an honor training alongside you." They shook hands, and Kira felt the last piece of something inside her settle into place. She had done it, not by being louder or more aggressive or more visible than everyone else, but by being exactly who she had always been: quiet, competent, patient, excellent. The graduation ceremony was scheduled for Monday morning. Until then, she had the weekend to rest and reflect on the journey that had brought her to this moment. As the sun set over Camp Pendleton, painting the Pacific Ocean in shades of orange and purple, Kira sat alone on a bench overlooking the water and thought about her father. "I did it, Dad," she whispered to the wind. "I proved that the Thornwald name stands for excellence, no matter who carries it. I hope I made you proud." Monday morning arrived with perfect California weather, the kind of clear blue sky that seemed designed for ceremonies and new beginnings. The graduation was held on the parade ground at Camp Pendleton, a formal military event attended by senior officers, families, and dignitaries who understood the significance of what these 12 candidates had accomplished. Kira stood in formation wearing her dress uniform, the Distinguished Marksman badge from Fort Bragg gleaming on her chest alongside her other ribbons and decorations. Her mother had flown in from Virginia, sitting in the audience with tears already streaming down her face. She had not seen her daughter in months, and the transformation was visible even from distance. Kira stood straighter, carried herself with a confidence that had been earned through fire. Master Chief Rains stood at the podium, his weathered face showing rare emotion as he addressed the gathered crowd. "The Naval Special Warfare Sniper course has a 58% attrition rate," he began. "What that means is that more than half of the highly qualified candidates who begin this program do not finish. They are not failures. They are simply not ready for what this discipline demands." He paused, looking at the 12 graduates standing at attention. "These 12 individuals standing before you today have proven they possess the skills, discipline, and character necessary to function as precision marksmen in support of the most elite combat operations in the world." He called each graduate forward individually, presenting them with their sniper qualification badges and certificates. When he reached Kira, he paused longer than he had with the others. "Corporal Kira Thornwald," he said, his voice carrying across the parade ground, "you have not only completed this course, you have excelled at it. You finished second in overall class rankings despite having no prior sniper training. You executed some of the finest stalking and long-range shooting I have witnessed in 15 years of running this program." He looked directly at her. "Your father, Master Chief Thomas Thornwald, was a legend in the SEAL community. Today, you have proven that excellence runs in your family. It is my honor to present you with a Naval Special Warfare Sniper qualification." He pinned the badge on her uniform, and the crowd erupted in applause. Kira maintained her military bearing, but tears were streaming down her face now, the emotion she had held in check for so long finally breaking through. This was not just her graduation. It was vindication for every moment of doubt, every incident of harassment, every time someone had assumed she did not belong. After the ceremony, as families and graduates mingled in the reception area, Colonel Hendricks appeared through the crowd. He had flown in specifically for this event, and his presence meant everything to Kira. "Corporal," he said, approaching with a smile. "Or should I say, Soontobe Sergeant Thornwald, your promotion came through this morning. Congratulations on both achievements." "Thank you, sir. And thank you for believing in me when others did not." I did not just believe in you, Hendricks replied. I knew you would succeed because I saw what your father saw. Absolute dedication to excellence, combined with the humility to continue learning. He handed her an envelope. This is your next assignment. You are being assigned to a SEAL team based out of Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. They specifically requested you after reviewing your course performance. Kira opened the envelope with trembling hands, reading the orders that would take her to the next phase of her career. Supporting SEAL operations as a qualified sniper, working alongside the best warriors in the American military. It was everything her father had prepared her for, everything she had worked toward. Her mother joined them, and Hendricks graciously excused himself to give them privacy. Kira embraced her mother, feeling the smaller woman shake with sobs. Your father would be so proud, her mother whispered. I wish he could be here to see this. He is here, Mom, Kira replied softly. Every lesson he taught me, every moment he spent preparing me for this. He has been with me every step of the way. They stood together while the celebration continued around them, a mother and daughter connected by love and by the memory of the man who had shaped them both. Chief Briggs found Kira later, carrying 2 bottles of water and looking more relaxed than she had ever seen him. I just got word that we're being assigned to the same team at Coronado, he said. Looks like you were stuck with me for a while longer, Thornwald. I can think of worse people to work with, Chief, she replied with a smile. Listen, I want you to know something. When you first showed up at this course, I had doubts. Not about your shooting, but about whether someone without combat experience could handle the pressure. He looked at her directly. You proved me wrong in the best possible way. You did not just meet the standard. You set a new one. The next female candidate who comes through here is going to have an easier time because of what you accomplished. That means everything, Chief. Thank you. As the afternoon wore on and the celebration began to wind down, Kira found herself standing alone for a moment, looking out at the Pacific Ocean that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from that first day at Fort Bragg when Coulter had dismissed her, through the sabotage and isolation, through the brutal challenges of the NSW course, to this moment of triumph. She had not changed who she was to succeed. She had remained true to the lessons her father taught her, to the belief that excellence spoke louder than words, that quiet competence was more powerful than loud bravado. And in remaining true to herself, she had not just succeeded. She had thrived. A voice behind her interrupted her thoughts. If you enjoyed this story, drop a comment and let us know your favorite part, or if you have witnessed someone show quiet strength in the face of adversity. Maybe you know someone in your own life who proved doubters wrong through dedication and excellence rather than words. Share your stories with us. Kira smiled at the interruption, recognizing it as part of something larger than just her story. This was about everyone who had ever been underestimated, everyone who had faced barriers that should not have existed, everyone who had persevered through dignity and discipline rather than anger and confrontation. She pulled out her phone and took a photo of her new sniper badge, the sunlight glinting off the metal. She sent it to Master Sergeant Voss with a simple message. Mission accomplished. Thank you for preparing me. His response came within minutes. Your father is smiling down on you today, Corporal. Now go be the sniper I always knew you could be. As the sun began to set over Camp Pendleton, Kira gathered her things and prepared to leave. Her mother was waiting, ready to spend a few precious days together before Kira reported to her new assignment at Coronado. Chief Briggs was organizing an informal dinner with some of the graduates. Colonel Hendricks had already departed, off to the next inspection or the next promising soldier who needed guidance. But before she left the parade ground, Kira stopped one more time and looked back at the compound, where she had spent 10 weeks transforming herself from a good shooter into an exceptional one. She thought about all the candidates who had started the course with her and did not finish. She thought about the instructors who had pushed her to her limits and then demanded she go further. She thought about her father and the legacy he had entrusted to her. And she thought about the future, about the operations she would support, about the SEAL teams who would depend on her skills when lives hung in the balance, about the next generation of female snipers who would follow the path she had helped to clear. She had proven that a woman could excel in this most demanding of military disciplines. She had shown that quiet excellence was its own form of strength. She had honored her father's memory while building her own legacy. The quiet sniper had found her voice, not through words, but through actions, not through confrontation, but through undeniable competence. And as she walked away from Camp Pendleton toward whatever challenges waited at Coronado, she carried with her the knowledge that she belonged there, that she had earned her place through the same standards applied to everyone else. She had not asked for special treatment. She had not needed it. She had simply been given the opportunity to prove what she could do, and she had taken that opportunity and turned it into excellence. That was the Thornwald way. That was the legacy her father had given her, and she would carry it forward, one perfect shot at a time, for as long as the military needed her skills. The quiet sniper was ready for whatever came next, and the world was about to discover just how powerful quiet excellence could be.